Hello, I'm Mark, and this is In the Round. Today I'm going to show you how to quickly put together a proportionally accurate posable miniature figure. These figures can serve either as models to test out proportions, gestures, or the relationships between figures in a grouping, or as a base for finished small-scale sculptures. More advanced sculptors make little figures like this in all kinds of different ways, so as always, I'm not claiming that what I show you here is the best or only method. Rather, it's a systematic approach that works well for beginners who find themselves at a loss for how to proceed. This will work with any amount of clay, so start with what feels comfortable for you. Here, I have 1, 1.5, and 2 pound examples. Roll the clay into a log and cut about 1/3 of it off. Precision isn't necessary, as there will be a degree of flexibility in all of our measurements, but try to err a little on the side of the 1/3 section. Divide both the 1/3 and the 2/3 sections, each again into thirds. Take one of the larger thirds of the 2/3 section. This will be your thorax, or rib cage. Shape it like a slightly flattened, slightly pointy egg. The pointy end is the top of the thorax, which tapers up to insert into the shoulder girdle. At the fat bottom end, press your thumb in to form the thoracic arch. At the top, and a little bit in front, press in a small hollow. This is where the neck will insert into the thorax. As you work, make sure that you retain good roundness in the thorax, and indeed in all of the parts. Beginners often flatten and facet the body into front, back, and side panels. In reality, we curve around smoothly. Take a second third of the 2/3 section and divide it in half. Shape one of the halves into a keystone block. This will be the pelvis. Use both thumbs and one finger to form the suggestion of the iliac crests. The thorax and the pelvis are the most structurally defining parts of the body, so assess the relationship between them. Do they seem proportional as you envision the figure you're building? Shape the second half of that third into an elongated oval. This will be the abdominal section. Insert one end into the depression between the iliac crests of the pelvis and the other into the thoracic arch. In a full-scale figure, the bottom of the thorax is only a couple of inches above the top of the iliac crests, so make sure they're quite close together. Note the angles of the torso in profile. The pelvis tilts slightly forward, the thorax slightly back. Check that there's appropriate volume in the abdomen, not so much that it feels like it's overflowing the thorax and pelvis, but not so little that it's floppy. If the clay is soft, you can gently work the sections together around the seams. If it's stiff, you can use a little slip to stick them together. See my video, The Remains of the Clay, for how to make slip. Take the last of the larger sections and divide it in half. These will be the thighs. Shape them into 2 long tapered ovals, each a little shorter than the full length of the torso. Flatten the fat ends a little at a slight angle to conform to the lateral openings of the iliac crests. Flatten and make a small depression at the pointy end perpendicular to the hip joint to form the back of the knee. Make sure that the thighs mirror each other and that you aren't making 2 lefts or 2 rights. Attach the thighs to the pelvis. Note that whenever you put soft clay down on a hard surface, it will start to flatten into it under its own weight. So I'm here resting the figure on a dry sponge while I make the new parts. Take one of the smaller thirds of a third and divide it in half. From one half, shape the head by first making a sphere, then pressing up behind the jawline where the neck inserts into the skull to shape the occipital. Flatten the face plane slightly. If you want, you can also rough in some features with a small compression tool, which can help to specify your figure's gesture and expression. Take the other half of this section and divide it again in half. Take one of these halves and shape the neck. Necks can vary greatly in length and thickness, and it may be necessary to remove a little clay here. Just put it to the side for now. Later, you can add it to any section that seems underweight, or you can use it for additional details. Attach the head to the neck and the neck to the thorax. Take the remaining half and divide it yet again in half to create the shoulder caps into which the arms will insert. This simplification, necessitated by the small scale at which we're working, combines the shoulder girdle and the deltoids. Though it isn't really necessary for these figures to be useful references, if you want them to be a little more accurate, you can add small tubes of clay for the clavicle out from the suprasternal notch to the acromion and back over the shoulder to the spine of the scapula. Divide another of the thirds of a third, again into thirds. 2 of these will be the lower legs, which should be full at the calves and taper strongly down to the ankles. You can also add the crest of the tibia in front if you want them to be a little more accurate. Attach the fat ends behind the knees, noting that in profile the front of the thigh will be forward of the shin and that the back of the calf will be behind the back of the thigh, about even with the glutes, though we're not really including those here. Divide the third of a third in half to make the feet, which will be shaped like fat wedges that crest slightly on their medial sides. Don't underestimate how thick feet are in profile. Attach the feet to the ankles. At this point, you may notice that the figure is getting a little hard to handle with its long, floppy legs. You might even find that the abdomen is cracking. If so, just fill in the lumbar and, if necessary, the oblique regions with a little bit of clay to strengthen the back. Take the final piece and cut off roughly 1/5. Divide this fifth into halves and from them shape the hands. At this scale, the hands should be simple paddles, mitts, or fists. Divide the remaining 4/5 first in half, then each of these halves into roughly 40-60 sections. The larger section will be the upper arms, the smaller, the lower. We've been working exclusively in thirds and halves up to this point, but now things aren't quite so tidy. There's lots of room for flexibility in proportions, however, so don't worry too much about the specific fractions. Just assess as you go and correct when necessary. For reference, when the arms are at the sides, the elbow should generally be about level with the bottom of the thorax, the wrist level with the greater trochanter of the femur, and the tips of the fingers about halfway down the thigh, measuring between the iliac crest and the knee. Shape the elbow as you did the knee, with the upper arm overhanging the lower and back at the elbow, or olecranon, though in actuality this is part of the ulna of the lower arm. Assemble the arms, starting at the shoulders and working your way down to the wrists. The figure is now complete and can be posed. If you built it well, it should move and bend very like a real figure. Just make sure you're bending at the joints and not in the middle of the bones. If you're having difficulty with the posing, it can be helpful to stiffen up all the rigid sections a little, the thorax, pelvis, arms, legs, and cranium, while leaving the flexible abdomen, neck, and shoulder caps soft for easy bending. If you find the figures keep falling down on you, you can stick toothpicks or bamboo skewers through their limbs to hold them in place. With a little practice, these figures will come fast and easy and should be a lot of fun to make.